somebody who can bring us a new perspective of this as well is Mr. John Sharp, and I'm going to bring you on, John. So you are the founder of Hatcher Plus, and from a VC lens, this is very refreshing, at least from my perspective as well. What is the level of investment interest in disaster technology solutions? Do you see this category growing?
It is growing, and first of all, thank you very much for inviting me today. It's great to be representing private enterprise and VC on this conversation. So it is growing, and it's interesting. If you look at the investment in disaster mitigation technology, say around 2016 in the US, is about $50 million. If you look last year, it was $200 million. And you may say, well, okay, so it's quadrupled in 4 years, but it's still a relatively small number. And I think that's true, but you need to remember that venture capital usually invests in things 20 years ahead of a really widespread need or distribution. And so what we were doing 20 years ago was investing in wind turbines and solar technologies and a whole host of things, probably along with research and development units inside Samir's corporation and other corporations. And what's happened now is, of course, they don't need venture capital to back wind turbines. I mean, there are charts you can download on the internet that show you the precise correlation between the return on investment and the wind speed and the size of the turbine you've chosen to purchase. So this is now in the realm of governments and private equity and utilities firms that are content with maybe a 9 to 12% IRR. In venture capital, we're looking for double that. We need to go for significantly higher investments, which is why we make those earlier bets. And I'd just like, before I move on to talk about VC, I'd just like to give a kudos to some of the government initiatives. I mean, you see the Biden administration spending $400 billion right now. You spend, the Europeans have committed $1 trillion to renewable energy over 10 years. I think there's some fantastic things happening upstream to help mitigate the climate crisis. And we're seeing a lot of the technologies that we invested in 20 years now coming online, really on steam. You see massive investment in wind in Vietnam and the Philippines, for just as 2 examples locally. You've got solar farms being built on top of reservoirs in Singapore, which is just amazing to watch that. So I'm of the opinion, and by the way, the California cap and trade system is working. They are reducing emissions. So I think there's a lot of good things going on upstream. The real problem, though, is it's going to take decades for that stuff, if it ever can, to reverse the effects of climate change. And that's where we all come in. And we've got to think, how are we going to look after these communities while all these disasters are continuing to happen? And so you asked me what the level of investment interest is. It's always correlated to the size of the problem. And I did a little research before coming on here today and figured out that if you count COVID into the cost of disasters in the last 40 years, you're looking at somewhere between 12 and $15 trillion worth of cost to the global economy. Now, that's exciting for any investor that's looking at solving a problem, because they can assume that people may put some of that money at risk in the form of solutions. And the great news is there's a fantastic number of solutions. I was just listening to Leslie thinking, yes, I've seen solutions that'll do that. And I was listening to Samir thinking, yes, I've seen solutions that'll do that. And so there's a lot of technologies out there. The real challenge that these startups face is getting funding for these, because a lot of investors are a little wary of investing in technologies that require a purchasing decision by a local community or even a central community. And so one of the challenges that we face in getting these technologies to market is we need to reduce the time that the regulators are going to take to approve these technologies. We need to decentralize the way these technologies are controlled. In every disaster movie, by the way, the people end up getting saved by a ham radio. Why? Because it's a completely decentralized technology that doesn't rely on a central server somewhere to operate. So what I would like to see is, and I think we've seen it with COVID, we saw a reduction. I think when the Ebola vaccine was announced that they had it, it took 5 years to get the regulators to agree to make the first trial. When COVID vaccine was announced, it took 5 months, right? And the difference is we've saved tens of millions of lives potentially around the world by producing that vaccine, and we've become a much more resilient community as a global community as a result. So I think we can do things, that there are some challenges that remain for private investors. The good news, and I'll leave on this note, is that there's never been so much interest from impact investors, from private investors in solving these problems. And there's never been so many ways that you can solve them for a profit, which means that when you make that profit, you can recycle that capital into solving the next realm of problems and the next realm. So I just want to commend Donald and Casey and the Prudential Foundation on the Safe Steps program, because we found a number of really terrific startups through that program that were just doing exactly the right thing and doing exactly what we need at the time we need to do to invest in it. But hopefully it won't take 15 years for those technologies to come online. Hopefully we can invest at a higher volume and we can get them online faster. But that's it from the private investment sort of representative on the council. I think there's some really good things going on upstream that will eventually mitigate the climate crises, but we need to do more to get these technologies to market faster, and we need to make sure we focus on the decentralized technologies so that we can mitigate these disasters better at the local level.